The Exilari Dominion was one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. It ruled over dozens of star systems, controlling trade, military power, and politics with an iron grip. The High Lords of Silari were feared and respected. Among them was High Lord Varkos, a ruthless leader who valued strength above all else. But in his grand palace, filled with warriors, advisors, and strategists, there was one who did not belong. A girl with sharp blue eyes and silver markings on her skin. Kalara, the youngest daughter of Varkos. Unlike her siblings, Kalara was not trained in war. She was not raised to fight or command armies. She was seen as weak, too kind, too soft for the brutal world of the Dominion. Her father rarely spoke to her, and her brothers and sisters mocked her. She was a shadow in her own home, forgotten by those who sought power. One day, everything changed. High Lord Varkos sat in his grand chamber, speaking with a Terran ambassador on a holographic screen. The Terrans, or humans, were a strange species. They were not as advanced as the Exilari, but they were unpredictable. They had defied stronger empires, survived wars they should have lost, and refused to submit to the Dominion's rule. Varkos had no interest in war with them, yet, for now, he needed to deal with a problem. "My daughter," Varkos said, his deep voice cold and distant, "is of no use to me." Kalara stood in the room, silent. She had been summoned without warning, unsure why. Now she understood. "I offer her as a gesture of goodwill," Varkos continued. "Let her live among humans. Let her learn from them. And in return, the Dominion will consider peaceful negotiations." The Terran ambassador, Elias Stroud, narrowed his eyes. He was an older man, a veteran of many battles, but his sharp mind was what made him dangerous. He studied Kalara carefully. "This is not a diplomatic exchange," he said. "You are casting her aside." Varkos did not even deny it. Stroud exhaled, looking at Kalara once more. "What do you think?" he asked her directly. She hesitated. No one had ever asked her opinion before. She looked at her father, but he gave no reaction. To him, her words did not matter. Finally, she spoke. "I will go." It was the first real choice she had ever made. The journey to New Terra, a human colony world, was long. Kalara spent most of it in silence, staring out of the ship's window as stars passed by. She had never been outside the Dominion's territory before. Now she was heading into the unknown. When they arrived, Kalara was greeted by the sight of a rugged but thriving world. New Terra was not like the pristine cities of the Dominion. It was alive, loud, and full of movement. Ships flew overhead, workers loaded cargo, and armored soldiers walked through the streets. The air smelled of metal and fuel, and the sky was filled with towering structures built from raw human determination. Elias Stroud, who had agreed to take responsibility for her, walked beside her. "Welcome to New Terra," he said. "It's not as fancy as your home, but we like it well enough." Kalara did not answer. She did not know what to say. This world was so different from what she knew. Here, power was not determined by birth, but by action. Stroud led her to a military base, where she would stay for the time being. "You're not royalty here," he told her firmly. "You're not a prisoner either. But if you want to survive, you'll have to learn how we do things." That night, Kalara sat alone in her quarters. She thought about her father, her home, and the life she had left behind. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. But for the first time, she also had a chance to become something more. Kalara woke up to the sound of loud voices outside her quarters. She was still adjusting to the human colony, and sleep had not come easily. The air was colder than she was used to, and the bed was firm, nothing like the luxury she once had in the Exilari palace. But those things did not matter. She was no longer a princess. She was no longer part of that world. She got out of bed, dressed in the simple clothes given to her, and stepped outside. The military base was busy, filled with humans moving with purpose. Soldiers trained, engineers repaired machines, and officers shouted orders. Kaylara watched in silence. Elias Stroud, the man responsible for her, stood nearby, speaking with a group of officers. He noticed her and walked over. "You're awake," he said. "Good. You're coming with me." She frowned. "Where?" Stroud smirked. "To learn." Kaylara soon found herself standing in the middle of a large training field. Around her, human soldiers sparred with one another, lifting heavy weights and running obstacle courses. She could feel their curious gazes on her. To them, she was an outsider, an alien, a stranger among warriors. Stroud tossed something at her. She caught it out of instinct, a training baton, light but strong. "If you're going to live here, you need to learn how to fight," Stroud said. "I don't care who your father is. Out here, the only thing that matters is what you can do." Kaylara hesitated. "I was never trained for combat." "Then it's time to start," Stroud said, stepping back. "Mara, you're up." A tall human woman stepped forward, her muscles lean but strong. She held her own baton and smiled. "I'll go easy on you, princess." Kaylara's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a princess." "Good," Mara said, lunging forward. Kaylara barely had time to react. The first strike hit her side, making her stumble. Before she could recover, another hit struck her shoulder. Pain flared, but she gritted her teeth. She would not fall. She dodged the next attack and swung her baton in return, but Mara easily blocked it. "Too slow," the human said, knocking Kaylara's weapon from her hands and sweeping her legs. Kaylara hit the ground hard. Laughter erupted from some of the soldiers watching. Kaylara pushed herself up, her pride burning more than the pain. She reached for the baton again, but Stroud stopped her. "That's enough for now," he said. "You need to learn how humans fight. You're fast, but you hesitate. That hesitation will get you killed." Kaylara clenched her fists but nodded. She hated feeling weak, but she would not run. She would learn. Over the next few weeks, Kaylara trained every day. The first days were painful. Her body ached, her reflexes were too slow, and she was constantly knocked down. But she refused to give up. She studied how the humans moved, how they reacted, and how they used not just strength but strategy. She learned more than just fighting. She watched how the humans treated each other. They argued, laughed, and worked as a team. They were not ruled by fear like the Xilari. Even the lowest-ranked soldier could challenge a commander if they had a better idea. It was strange, but it made them strong. One evening, after a long training session, Kaylara sat outside, looking at the stars. Stroud approached, handing her a canteen of water. "You did well today," he said. Kaylara took a sip and nodded. "Mara didn't knock me down this time." Stroud chuckled. "That's progress." He leaned back against a railing, looking at her. "So tell me, what do you want, Kaylara?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked her that before. Her father decided her fate. Her people ignored her. Now, for the first time, her future was hers to choose. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't want to be weak anymore." Stroud nodded, a small smile on his face. "Good. Because weakness isn't about strength. It's about giving up. And I don't think you're the kind to give up." For the first time since she arrived, Kaylara felt something she never had before. Hope. The alarm blared through the base, a sharp and urgent sound that sent soldiers rushing to their positions. Kaylara had never heard it before, but she knew what it meant. An attack. She ran outside, her heart pounding. The sky above New Terra was filled with streaks of light as enemy ships entered the atmosphere. Explosions erupted in the distance, and the city beyond the base fell into chaos. People screamed, soldiers barked orders, and sirens wailed. Elias Stroud stood near the command center, his face tense. When he saw Kaylara, he called out, "Gear up. This isn't a drill." Kaylara hesitated. She had trained for weeks, but she had never been in a real battle. Now, the enemy was here. She knew who they were before Stroud even said it. Xilari Warband. Looks like some of your people don't care about peace. Kalara felt a cold anger rise in her chest. The Xilari Dominion never saw humans as equals. Some warlords still thought they could take what they wanted. Stroud tossed her a rifle. You trained for this. Time to see if you're ready. She caught the weapon, gripping it tightly. She would not run. The battlefield was chaos. Enemy dropships landed near the colony's outskirts, unloading squads of Xilari warriors. They were heavily armored, their weapons more advanced than the human soldiers, but they were not prepared for the sheer determination of their opponents. Kalara moved with a squad of human soldiers, taking cover behind a damaged transport vehicle. Plasma bolts from enemy rifles burned through the air, hitting metal and sending sparks flying. Move up, Mara shouted. She and the others sprinted forward, firing as they went. Kalara followed, her hand steady as she raised her rifle. A Xilari warrior charged toward them, taller and stronger than any human. He aimed his weapon at Mara, but before he could fire, Kalara pulled the trigger. Her shot struck his armor, staggering him. He turned toward her, his glowing red eyes narrowing. He raised his weapon. Kalara didn't think. She acted. She rushed forward, dodging to the side as the enemy fired. With a swift motion, she slammed the butt of her rifle against his helmet, then spun and kicked him backward. He stumbled, and before he could recover, Mara finished him with a clean shot to the head. Kalara breathed heavily, her heart racing. Her first kill. Not bad, Mara said with a grin. Took you long enough. Kalara didn't respond. She had just fought one of her own people. A Xilari, like her, but he was not her people anymore. She was fighting for something else now. The battle raged for hours. The Xilari warband was well armed, but they had underestimated the humans. The defenders of New Terra fought with a desperation and fury that Xilari had never encountered before. Kalara stood alongside them, using everything she had learned. She moved like a soldier, aimed like a warrior, and fought like a survivor. The fear that had once held her back was gone, replaced by a fire that burned in her veins. As the last enemy dropship tried to escape, human artillery locked onto it and fired. The explosion lit up the sky, and the remaining Xilari forces fell into retreat. It was over. For the first time, humanity had defeated a Xilari force in direct combat. That night, the soldiers gathered around the base. Some were wounded, some were exhausted, but there was a quiet sense of victory among them. Kalara sat with Stroud and Mara, staring at the battlefield ruins in the distance. You did good today, Stroud said. You could have run, but you didn't. Kalara looked down at her hands. I had no choice. You always have a choice, Mara said, and you chose to fight. Kalara thought about that. For so long, she had felt weak, unimportant. But today, she had stood her ground. She had earned her place among them. And for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. The battlefield was silent now. Smoke rose from the wreckage of enemy ships, and the scent of burned metal and plasma filled the air. The Xilari warband had been defeated, but victory did not feel as sweet as Kalara expected. She walked through the battlefield, stepping over fallen warriors, both human and Xilari. Some of the soldiers were collecting weapons and salvaging supplies, while others carried their wounded to medical stations. The cost of victory was high. Kalara's gaze fell on a fallen Xilari soldier. His armor was shattered, his weapon lying beside him, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. He had been one of her people, but not anymore. You recognize him? A voice asked behind her. She turned to see Elias Stroud, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was tired, but his sharp eyes studied her carefully. Kalara shook her head. No, but he was Xilari. Stroud nodded. They came here thinking they could take what they wanted. But we don't let anyone take from us. Kalara looked around at the human soldiers. They had fought not for conquest, but for survival. The Dominion had always seen humans as weak, but she now understood the truth. They were stronger than anyone realized. That night, the survivors gathered at the base. The air was filled with the sound of voices, some grieving, some celebrating. Soldiers shared stories, cleaned their weapons, and honored those who had fallen. Kalara sat alone, staring at the fire in front of her. Her body ached from battle, but it was her thoughts that troubled her the most. She had killed today. She had fought beside humans. She had turned her weapon against the very people who had once ignored her, cast her aside. Did that make her a traitor, or did it make her something more? Mara sat down beside her, offering her a metal cup filled with hot liquid. "You're thinking too much," she said with a smirk. Kalara took the cup and sipped. The drink was bitter, but warm. "I don't know how to feel." "That's normal," Mara said. "The first battle is always the hardest." Kalara looked at her. "Does it get easier?" Mara was silent for a moment. Then she shook her head. "No, but you learn to live with it." Kalara stared into the fire. Could she live with it? Could she continue fighting? She thought about her father, High Lord Varkos. He had cast her aside, believing she was weak. He had never given her a choice. But now she had made her own choice. And she would keep fighting, not for the Dominion, but for herself. Over the next few days, Kalara trained harder than ever. She pushed herself in combat drills, learning new tactics from the human soldiers. She studied their technology, their strategies, and their way of thinking. She no longer hesitated. She no longer doubted herself. And the soldiers noticed. "She's learning fast," Mara said to Stroud as they watched Kalara spar against 3 opponents at once. Stroud nodded. "She's not just learning. She's adapting." Mara smirked. "You think she's one of us now?" Stroud crossed his arms. "She's not Xilari anymore, and if she keeps this up, she's going to be something even greater." One evening, as Kalara was cleaning her weapons, a call came through on the command terminal. Stroud answered it, his face darkening as he listened. Kalara noticed the shift in his expression. "What is it?" she asked. Stroud turned to her, his voice serious. "We just received intel. The Dominion isn't happy about their loss. They're sending a fleet." Kalara's breath caught. "A full fleet?" Stroud nodded. "They're coming to take New Terra by force." The room was silent. The war had just begun. Kalara clenched her fists. She had trained, she had fought, and she had survived. Now she had to lead. She was no longer a forgotten daughter. She was a warrior. And she would stand with humanity, no matter what came next. The air in New Terra's military base was thick with tension. The news had spread. The Xilari Dominion was coming. Not a small warband, not a scouting force, but a full invasion fleet. Kalara stood with the soldiers, feeling the weight of the moment. The humans had won a battle, but war was different. The Xilari Dominion would not accept defeat. They would come with overwhelming force, bringing ships, warriors, and destruction. And if the humans lost, there would be no mercy. Elias Stroud gathered the senior officers around a large holographic table, displaying the incoming fleet. The soldiers around Kalara murmured as they looked at the sheer number of enemy warships. The humans were outnumbered, but they were not broken. Stroud turned to his officers. "We can't outgun them, and we can't outrun them, but we can outthink them." Kalara listened carefully as the humans discussed strategies. They didn't rely on brute strength like the Xilari. They relied on tactics, on creativity, on their will to survive. And that gave them an edge, a plan of defiance. As the hours passed, the humans formed a battle plan. Instead of fighting the Xilari fleet head-on, they would lure them into a trap. The colony's outer defenses were weak, and the Xilari would see it as an easy victory. But hidden beneath the surface of New Terra were artillery cannons and missile launchers, powerful weapons that could turn the battlefield against the invaders. The plan was risky. If the Xilari realized the trap too soon, they could adjust their strategy and wipe out the defenders. But the humans had no choice. They had to fight smart. Mara nudged Kalara as they reviewed the battle map. Your people won't expect this. Kalara smirked. That's because they think humans are weak. Stroud folded his arms. And we're going to prove them wrong. Kalara's role. As the soldiers prepared for war, Kalara found herself standing before a group of elite fighters, both human and trained combatants. Stroud had given her a special mission. You're one of us now, he had told her. And if we're going to survive, we need your skills. Kalara's task was to infiltrate one of the enemy's landing ships. The Dominion would send drop troops to take over New Terra's capital. But if Kalara and her team could hijack one of the Xilari's own ships, they could turn their weapons against their own fleet. It was dangerous. It was nearly impossible. And Kalara accepted without hesitation. I'll do it, she said. I know how they think. I know how they fight. Stroud placed a hand on her shoulder. Then let's make them regret ever underestimating us. The calm before the storm. The night before battle, Kalara stood on the base's watchtower, staring at the stars. Somewhere out there, her father's people were coming to destroy everything. Would he be among them? Would High Lord Varkos himself lead the attack? She did not know. But she did know one thing. She would not run. Mara walked up beside her. Couldn't sleep. Kalara shook her head. I'm thinking about what's coming. Mara smirked. You're not the only one. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching the distant stars. Then Mara said, You know, I used to think you were just some spoiled alien princess. Kalara chuckled. And now? Mara grinned. Now, I think you might be crazier than all of us. Kalara smiled. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow, the Xilari would come. And tomorrow, they would learn that humans were not prey. They were fighters, survivors, warriors, and Kalara would stand with them. The sky above New Terra burned with fire as the Xilari invasion fleet arrived. Massive warships cast shadows over the land, their engines roaring like thunder. The ground trembled as drop pods and landing ships descended, carrying thousands of elite Xilari warriors. In the heart of the human base, Kalara stood with her team, ready for the mission. Stroud's voice echoed through the comms. They're coming in fast. Get into position. We hold them here. Kalara tightened her grip on her weapon. She could see the first wave of enemy troops moving toward the city. They thought this would be easy. They were wrong. The trap is set. The Xilari warlords led their forces with confidence, believing the humans were weak. They advanced, their energy shields protecting them as they marched through the open fields toward the colony. But just as they reached the outer perimeter, the ground erupted with fire. Hidden turrets and missile launchers burst to life, launching deadly projectiles into the enemy ranks. Artillery shells rained from the skies, striking down entire squads in an instant. The Xilari lines broke as explosions tore through their forces. They had expected a simple ground war, but instead, they walked into a death trap. Kalara watched from a distance, her heart pounding. The humans had prepared well. But this was only the beginning. The real fight was about to begin. Kalara's mission begins. While the main battle raged outside, Kalara and her team moved through the shadows. Their target was a Xilari landing ship docked on the outskirts of the battlefield. If they could take control of it, they could use its weapons against the fleet. Mara moved beside her, whispering, This is insane. Kalara smirked. That's why it'll work. They slipped through the enemy defenses, using the chaos to their advantage. Xilari soldiers were focused on the battle ahead, unaware that one of their own was sneaking into their ranks. Reaching the landing ship, Kalara signaled her team. Move fast. Take out the guards. With swift, silent attacks, they eliminated the sentries. Kalara moved through the halls of the ship, her every step steady. She was no longer the weak, forgotten daughter of a warlord. She was a soldier now, a warrior. She reached the control room and hacked into the system. The enemy fleet was still unaware of their presence. Kalara's heart raced. This was it. With a deep breath, she activated the ship's weapons and turned them against the Xilari. The turning point. From the battlefield below, Strode and his soldiers watched in shock as one of the Xilari warships suddenly opened fire on its own fleet. What the hell? Mara's voice crackled over the comms. Stroud grinned. That's Kalara. The Xilari fleet panicked. The stolen ship unleashed a deadly barrage of missiles and laser fire, striking their own warships. Confusion spread through the enemy ranks. Some commanders hesitated, unsure whether they were under attack from within. And the humans took advantage of the chaos. With a roar of determination, the soldiers of New Terra pushed forward, driving back the Xilari invaders. The tide of battle had turned. The impossible was happening. The humans were winning. The final stand. But the Xilari were not defeated yet. From the largest warship in the fleet, a massive Xilari overlord descended onto the battlefield. His armor was black as night, his presence enough to make even the bravest soldiers hesitate. Kalara recognized him immediately. High Lord Varkos, her father. Her breath caught in her throat. He had come personally to crush the rebellion, to end this war himself. He stepped forward, his red eyes scanning the battlefield, and then landing on Kalara. Silence fell. Even the Xilari soldiers stopped. The human forces held their breath. Varkos studied her, his expression unreadable. Then his voice boomed across the battlefield. You stand with them. Kalara gritted her teeth. I fight for them. Her father's eyes darkened. Then you are no daughter of mine. Kalara felt no pain at his words. She had expected them. She had already made her choice. Lifting her weapon, she stood firm. No, she said. I never was. And then, the final battle began. The battlefield stood still for a brief moment. High Lord Varkos faced Kalara, his crimson eyes filled with cold disappointment. The air was thick with tension as soldiers, both Xilari and human, watched in silence. Then Varkos drew his blade. A long, curved energy sword ignited in his hand, glowing with deadly light. His voice was calm, yet full of authority. You were born of my blood, he said. You could have been great. Instead, you stand with the weak. Kalara held her ground. She was not afraid. Not anymore. These people are not weak, she replied. They fight because they believe in something greater than conquest. Varkos narrowed his eyes. Then you are a fool. And with that, he charged. Father versus daughter. Kalara barely had time to react before Varkos was upon her. He was fast, too fast. His blade swung down, and she barely managed to block with her energy staff. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. The force of his attack sent her skidding backward. He was stronger than her, more experienced. But she had something he did not, the will to fight for something greater than herself. She steadied herself and attacked. Their battle became a blur of movement, steel against steel, power against speed. Kalara dodged, countered, and struck back with everything she had. The human soldiers and Xilari warriors watched, knowing that this fight would decide the future of the battle. Varkos pressed forward, his attacks relentless. You cannot defeat me, he said. You were never meant to lead. Kalara gritted her teeth. She had spent her entire life believing that. But not anymore. With a sudden burst of speed, she dodged his next strike and countered with a powerful kick to his chest. Varkos staggered back, surprised. You are wrong, Kalara said, her voice steady. I was never meant to follow. The turning point. Varkos growled in frustration. His Xilari warriors hesitated. For the first time, they saw their mighty leader struggle. And the humans saw something else. Hope. Mara and Stroud seized the moment. Now, Stroud shouted. The human soldiers charged forward, overwhelming the remaining Xilari forces. The battle erupted once more, but this time, the humans had the upper hand. Kalara saw it all from the corner of her eye, but she remained focused. Her fight was not over. Varkos roared and lunged at her again. This time, she was ready. She sidestepped his attack, spinning behind him. With a precise strike, she slashed across his armor, damaging his energy shield. He growled in pain. "You think you have won." Kalara tightened her grip on her weapon. "I don't think." She stepped forward, determination in her eyes. "I know." With one final strike, she disarmed him. Varkos dropped his weapon, falling to one knee. For the first time in his life, he looked defeated. The Silari warriors saw their leader fall. Their morale shattered. And the humans, they won. The aftermath. The remaining Silari forces surrendered. The war was over. The skies above New Terra cleared as the Dominion fleet retreated. Kalara stood over her father, breathing heavily. He looked up at her, his face unreadable. "You should kill me," he said. "That is what a true warrior would do." Kalara shook her head. "No, that is what you would do." Varkos exhaled, as if understanding something for the first time. His daughter was no longer the weak child he had cast away. She was stronger than him. As soldiers secured the battlefield, Mara and Strahd approached Kalara. "You did it," Mara said with a grin. Kalara looked around at the victorious human forces. "No," she said. "We did it." A new beginning. Days later, New Terra stood free. The people rebuilt, soldiers rested, and the fallen were honored. Kalara stood at the edge of the city, looking at the horizon. The war was over, but her journey was just beginning. Mara joined her, leaning against a post. "So, what now?" Kalara smiled. "I don't know, but I do know one thing." She turned to Mara, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm not going back. I belong here." Mara smirked. "Welcome home." Kalara looked toward the future. She had started as a forgotten daughter, but now she was something greater. A warrior, a leader, a hero, humanity's hero.